There we go. Okay, so we are in Shmuel Aleph, and we are going to talk about chapter 13. I left you last week with a question, a difficult question, which all the Mefarshim speak about in this beginning of chapter 13. It's a bit of a crazy first sentence. Let's go straight to the screen and show it to you. Hang on a second. I've only got one screen here in Manchester, so it's a little bit more difficult for me to manipulate things. So just give me a second to get it up on the screen correctly. Just a little bit more faffing around. There we go. Right. Now then, chapter 13 of Shmuel Aleph. Let's start by just reading the Pesukim. Let's read the first pasuk, Leon.
It was in the first year of Saul's reign. He reigned over Israel for 2 years.
Okay, let's just stop there. Who would like to object to the translation that Leon just said out loud? Say it again for us, Leon, will you?
It was in the first year of Saul's reign. He reigned over Israel for 2 years.
Okay, now I'm going to read you the Hebrew. No, I'm not. I'm going to ask you, first of all, what's wrong with that translation? And the translation that's on the screen is wrong as well. Anyone?
My translation says Saul was questionable years old when he became king.
Shaul was what?
Questionable, no, was XXX years old. It doesn't say how many years old when he became king.
Very interesting, Michael. Where is that translation from?
That is from Sepharia.
Sepharia, okay. Well, good old Sepharia. Right. Okay. Well, let's just bear that in mind. My question, what you've just given me is an answer to my next question, Michael. But the question that I asked just now was what's wrong with the translation? How should it be translated? Ben Shana Shaul b'molacho. What does that mean? What is it?
How old he was. It means how old he was.
Yeah, but what does it actually mean? What are those words?
Shana.
Ben Shana. If I said to you, Ani Ben Shana, what does that mean?
I am
1 year old.
I am 1 year old, correct. So Ben Shana Shaul b'molacho means that Shaul was 1 year old when he began to reign. That's what it means. That is the translation of those words. Now, clearly...
Except, Johnny, would it not be Shaul ben Haya ben Shana if he is saying he was 1 year old?
That would be in modern Hebrew, yes. Yeah. But in biblical Hebrew, we often have it the other way around. And I'm going to show you a few examples in Tanakh in a few minutes where exactly the same sentence construction is there. So it's a very, very strange pasuk, this, and it's quite likely, although I have actually prepared a lot more of this chapter last night because I was so fascinated by it, but it's quite likely that we might not actually get beyond this pasuk today because there's so much in here which is odd. Clearly, Shaul was not 1 year old when he began to be king. We know that, don't we? Because we just had the whole story about when he became king, out looking for the donkeys, and he found Shmuel, and he got crowned, and all the stuff that we've learned over the last few weeks. He clearly was not 1 year old. So there's something wrong with this pasuk. And the next
is it like we said? With Sarah, was it Sarah or Rivka? I can't remember. That they were keben. They were like.
Yes, Johnny, you're quite right.
I have a little clue here, but I think that refers me back to when she was like a 17-year-old when she was.
You're right. We'll talk about that in a second. You're quite right. Just as they say in modern parlance, hold that thought. We're coming back to it.
Okay.
The second half of the pasuk is also problematic. Look at it. What does it say? Ushtei shanim malach al Yisrael. How did you translate that, Leon?
He reigned over Israel for 2 years.
Okay, so did Saul reign over Israel for 2 years? Is that true? Michael Krauss is shaking his head reasonably vigorously. How do you know that it's not true, Michael?
It just doesn't figure from the story.
It does not figure from the story at all. How and in what regard do you say that? Give me some evidence for that, please.
I haven't got any evidence.
It's a feeling you have, is it?
A feeling, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The story, it can't possibly be that he only reigned for 2 years, and I shall prove it to you shortly. But so we've got this very weird pasuk here that first of all tells us that Shaul was 1 year old when he became king. He reigned for 2 years, which means that at the end of his kingdom, reign, he was 3 years old. That's what that pasuk means. You cannot get away from it. That is what the pasuk means. Now, clearly, it's not right. There's something going on here, which is why the Art Scroll translation that Leon read out and the translation that I've got on the screen, which is the Chabad one, changes the meaning of the pasuk. Michael's translation from Sepharia goes on and gives us some answers. But I'm not going to go there just yet. I want to show you some other things first before we get to Michael's answer. So now, so let's do the second part of the verse first. I want to get rid of this off my screen. Wait a minute. There we go. So if we go to this here, this is chapter 14, the next chapter. Leon, just turn over a page or two and go to chapter 14 of Shmuel Aleph, and I've highlighted on the screen for you verse 47.
Saul consolidated the kingdom over Israel. He waged war against all his enemies all around, with Moab and with the children of Ammon and with Edom and with the kings of Zobah and with the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inspired terror. He assembled an army and struck Amalek, and he rescued Israel from the hand of its oppressor.
Okay, let's stop there. So, in those two Pesukim, Saul has had a war against Moab, Ammon, Edom, Zobah, Plishtim, and Amalek. And he did all that, apparently, in 2 years. That is where, that is the evidence, Michael, that you were seeking for your feeling that the story just doesn't feel right. It's not right. It wasn't just 2 years. It can't have been. And I'm going to prove to you another reason why it can't be. And we are now going to go to over here. And that is chapter 27, Leon, of Shmuel Aleph. Now,
are you saying he couldn't have done that in 2 years, Johnny?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. All of those wars could not have gone on in 2 years, and they didn't go on in 2 years. We also know, don't we, from the story, we haven't got there yet in this shiur, but we will eventually. We'll get to chapter 27 and the preceding chapters, that Shaul spent quite some time pursuing David. You all know the story because you'll know it from the Haftorah of Machar Chodesh, which is the story of David and Jonathan. Shaul saw King David, or saw David as he was at that time, as a threat to his kingdom. And of course, he was quite right to see him as a threat to the kingdom, because he was a threat to the kingdom. And he spent a long time chasing him and pursuing him and what have you. So we know that that was going on. Now, have a look at chapter 27. David was off fleeing from the clutches of Shaul. And let's just go from verse 4, Leon.
It was told to Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he no longer searched for him. David said to Achish, "If I have found favor in your eyes, let them give me a place in one of the towns of the countryside that I may settle there. Why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you?" So Achish gave him Ziklag on that day. This is why Ziklag belongs to the kings of Judah to this day. The number of days that David dwelled in the Philistine countryside was 4 months and 2 days.
Okay, let's just stop there. Okay, 4 months and 2 days, says Leon. Now, why does he say that? Vayihi mispar hayamim asher yashav David b'shtei Plishtim. And it was the number of days that David dwelt in the land of the Plishtim. So he's now hiding, or not hiding, but he's run away from Shaul, and he's found refuge in the fields of the Plishtim. And he was there a certain length of time. And the pasuk tells us that it was Yamim ve'arba'a chodashim. It was Yamim. What does Yamim mean?
Rab Steinsaltz says it's 1 year.
Yeah. Yom is a year. Yeah.
Okay, so we know that Yom is a day, don't we? Hayom, Yom, Rishon. Today,
Yeah.
Yom is a day. And we know that Yamim are days, okay, in the plural, which is why, and what's the minimum number of days you can have, which will be plural? 2. Okay, 2. So that is why Leon translated it as, again, please, Leon.
4 months and 2 days.
4 months and 2 days. That is the literal translation of that pasuk. Now, we also know, as Philip has said, and as Johnny has said from Rav Steinsaltz, that Yamim can also mean a year of days. Okay, that's how it is. Now, if you have a look at the let me just see where it is. Rashi and Radak both quote. Let's see what the Rashi says. Actually, I can show you the Rashi. I can't show you the Radak, but I can show you the Rashi. There we go. Let's have a look at this. Rashi says the minimum of days being 2. It is impossible to explain this word Yamim as a year, which is what you would normally say, since David did not go to Achish until Shmuel had died, and Shaul reigned only 4 months after Shmuel's demise, as we learn in I'm not sure what SO is, chapter 13. This can also be determined from the number of Eli's years, okay, blah, 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 okay? So he says that it's got to be 2 days and 4 months, says Rashi. Now, Rav Steinsaltz says it's a year and 4 months. So Yamim refers to a year. Does he? I haven't got my Steinsaltz with me because I didn't bring it to England. Johnny, does he give any source for that view?
Yeah, it says 1 year in brackets Yamim and 4 months. The translation of Yamim as a year follows Radak, citing certain versions of Targum Yonatan. Right. Others maintain that in this context, Yamim means a few days.
Right. Okay. So we've got Rashi who says a few days, and we've got the Radak that says a year. Okay. So we're going to go for the moment with the Radak. The Radak says it's a year and 4 months. Now, as my old Rebbe, Rabbi Goldberg, used to say, the Radak was a Jewish man. and he knew a thing or two. And if he says it was a year and 4 months, then even if we might disagree with that opinion, it's a valid opinion which we can't just ignore. Now, if it was a year and 4 months that David dwelt in the fields of the Philistines, it's impossible that Shaul could have had all those wars that we spoke about over here in chapter 14, and spent 16 months and some more chasing David Amelech. And the whole thing, as Michael Krauss quite rightly said, it don't fit. It's just not right. Can't be 2 years. So there's something going on here. And you add that to the idea that he certainly was 1 year old when he started to reign. We've got something odd going on in this pasuk. One of what Rashi says about this is what Johnny Halpin was referring to a few minutes ago. And he says, Rashi says, well, let's have a look at the Rashi on this pasuk. Rashi says here, Saul was a year in his reign. And then look in the brackets. I don't know if you can see the screen. It might not be big enough for you to see. But in brackets there in the Rashi, it says literally a year old. Our rabbis of sainted memory said, like a 1-year-old who did not experience the taste of sin. And he quotes the Gemara in Yoma 22b. So what Johnny was referring to was Sarah Imenu. Sarah, we're told that when she died in the beginning of Parshat Chaye Sarah, we're told that she was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, okay? And it doesn't say she was 127 years. It splits it up. And Rashi over there says that at 100 years, she was as beautiful as she was when she was 20. And at 20 years, she was as sin-free as she was when she was 7 years. And so that's what you're remembering, Johnny, quite correctly. And this is the same idea. What Rashi is quoting Chazal, who are saying that this means that he wasn't literally a year old. We know that, but he was so sin-free. He was so innocent of anything wrong that he'd done wrong that he was like a 1-year-old. It's a bit tricky, that, to be honest, because why would we just say that about Shaul, who actually did not cover himself in glory during his reign, and of course he had the kingdom removed from him, the kingship, or whatever the expression is, removed from him. So it would be a bit odd, to be honest, that we would say such great things about him at this particular point. So a lot of the Mefarshim don't like that idea that Rashi brings here, and in particular the Radak does not like it at all. Ralbag, we came across Ralbag some time ago. He was a 14th century French astrologer, and he was a very great rationalist. He didn't like using miracles, if we could use normal explanations. The Ralbag doesn't like this either. He's bothered by the second question, and he suggests that you'll remember at the end of last week's shiur. Let's just go back one chapter to chapter 12, at the end of chapter 12. There we go. If you look at the end of chapter 12, we had the situation whereby, where are we now? It might have been the end of chapter 11, actually. Yes, it might have been. Let's go to chapter 11. The end of chapter 11, there we go. And all the people went to Gilgal, and they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal, and there they slaughtered peace offerings before the Lord. Do you remember that this was the second coronation of Shaul HaMelech? The first coronation had been earlier on, where he had to be schlepped out. He was hiding amongst the baggage. and not everybody accepted him. A few people said, well, I'm not accepting this little Shmuel as king. We want somebody a bit more impressive than him. And they didn't bring him a tribute. Remember all that? And then he overcame the people at Yavesh Gilad. He overcame the attackers, Ammon, and he then became accepted by everybody. And they had a second coronation over here in Gilgal. That was at the end of chapter 11. So what the Ralbag wants to say in our chapter is that 1 year business means that there was 1 year between the two coronations, and that the Ralbag suggests that 1 year passed from the anointing of Shaul to the renewal of the kingdom in Gilgal, and the events described in this chapter occurred 2 years later. So what he wants to say is that Shaul was crowned king. He didn't do much for the first year. Then he had the business with Ammon at Yavesh Gilad. Everybody accepted him. He was crowned for a second time. And then 2 years later, the following things happened. Now, that's the Ralbag's explanation. Now, as I said before, the Ralbag was a bit of a rationalist. You remember we first came across him in the story of the sun standing still for Joshua. And he didn't like that at all, because he said, no, that can't be right, because it was in the wrong place. The sun shouldn't have been in the valley there at the time. And he gave a completely different explanation, which was much more rational, that it was a prayer. So the Ralbag is consistent here, and he says, no, this isn't right. But the question still remains, even though we've got explanations for the pasuk. The question still remains why the pasuk is written in this weird way. And in fact, all these explanations, they're all pretty much sort of, they're a bit schwach, really, if you were honest. They're not really very satisfactory.
In the Steinsal's, it said that some explain that there is a missing word.
Coming to that. I'm coming to that.
I was going to say, well, why didn't they put it in?
Yeah, well, that's right. That's the obvious question. So we're going to come to that answer now. We're going to come to the answer that Michael Krauss.
I think Michael mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to come to the answer that Michael Krauss gave, and that is, and it's based on a 13th century biblical commentator and grammarian called Rabbi Tanchum HaYerushalmi. I'd never heard of him, actually, and in fact, it says in the notes about him, very little is known about his life. His original explanation of the verse here is also brought in the Dat Mikra commentary. So there's a chap called Rabbi Tanchum HaYerushalmi, and what he said, which is the explanation that Safaria is taken on board, actually the word's missing here. And what it should say is ben so and so many years, Shaul b'Malacho. Shaul was XXX years old when he began to reign. Now, why does he say that? Because there is precedent for that in Tanakh. Now, let me see if I can find it. Think this might be it. Yes, there we go. Look at Shmuel Bet, please. Shmuel Bet, chapter 5. This is when King David was crowned king. Look at the words. Verse 4, please, Leon.
David was 30 years old when he began to reign. He ruled for 40 years.
Okay, look at the words in Hebrew. Ben Shloshim Shana David b'Malacho. What does our pasuk say? Ben Shana Shaul b'malacho. Exactly the same wording. Let's go back to our one. There it is. Exactly the same wording, except we've got a figure. Ben shloshim shana. So he was 30 years old. Arba'im shana malach. He reigned for 40 years. So here we've got the second half of the pasuk is still difficult because of the 2-year business, but it's clear that according to Rav Tamchum Yerushalmi, there should be a figure there, ben something shana, okay, ben something shana, in the same way as we have over here, ben shloshim shana, David b'molacho. So there's a proof from Tanakh itself that there's possibly a problem here with this pasuk. So that's why Rav Tamchum says that there's something missing. And he explains the second half of the pasuk by saying that actually only 2 of his years, he only reigned for 2 years before everything started to unravel for him. So effectively, his reign was only 2 years. So that's what Rav Tamchum says, and that's why Michael said X years. Can you read it again, Michael, that translation, so we can see what they say for the second half of the pasuk?
Okay, Saul was ... years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 2 years.
Okay, so we've still got the issue of reigning over 2 years.
Couldn't that mean the Radak? The Radak has got a reasonable explanation. 2 years before all these wars started, really.
Yes, possibly right. The Radak says that it was 2 years before everything kicked off. So what's going on here is that this pasuk is clearly not literal. It's defective in some way. We've missed out how old he was, and the Tanakh really is misleading us in telling us that he only reigned for 2 years. Now, according to Rav Amnon Bazak, who is one of the Rabbeim in Gush Etzion, in Yeshivat Har Etzion in Alon Shvut, his theory is that this pasuk is defective to tell us that actually Shaul himself and his reign was defective, and it's a way of hinting to us that Shaul was not the greatest king that we have ever had, and he brings some proofs from later on in Tanakh, whereby kings who are not doing great things, who don't actually amount to much, are treated in a sort of disdainful way. And he starts with Shmuel Bet, chapter 3. Leon, Shmuel Bet, chapter 3. There we are. And what we find here is in verse 7. I'll tell you what, I've already highlighted it for you. Read. Well, let's see. Where do we need to go from? We probably need to go to. Okay, I will go and read you out all those names. Basically, this is a list of what was the wars between the house of Shaul, who Shaul was already dead by now, and the house of David. And so read verse 7 for us, please.
Now Saul had a concubine. Her name was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why were you intimate with my father's concubine?"
Okay, stop there, please. Stop there. Who can spot the deliberate mistake in the scroll translation? I'll let you read it again, Leon, and then ask that question. Listen carefully, everyone, and tell me, where is the deliberate mistake here in the Art Scroll translation?
Now Saul had a concubine. Her name was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, Ishbosheth, said to Abner, "Why were you intimate with my father's concubine?"
Okay, where's the deliberate mistake?
There's no Ishbosheth in the Hebrew.
There is no Ishbosheth in the Hebrew. Now I'm going to translate you this pasuk, okay, as it is in the Hebrew, and you will see why there is a deliberate mistake in the art scroll. Ula Shaul Pilegesh, and Shaul had a concubine, not a concubine. Ushma Ritzbah. By the way, this is another one of our examples of being not a given name, but a name which somebody during their life. Why do I say that? What's the word Ritzbah mean?
The floor.
The floor. Why would you call your daughter the floor? You don't. She obviously had something in her life going on which got her this nickname. She wouldn't have been called Ritzpah by her parents. She wouldn't call a baby girl the floor. But there you are. That's just by the by. Anyway, this is what she was called. Vayomer. What does the word Vayomer mean?
And he said.
And he said. Who is the subject of this pasuk right now?
Shaul.
Shaul. So if you just have this pasuk, it reads, Shaul Pilegesh, famous Ritzpah, and he said to Avner, i.e. Shaul said to Avner, why have you been intimate with my father's Pilegesh? Doesn't make sense, does it? Because, for two reasons, because it was Shaul's Pilegesh, so why does it say, why have you been intimate with my father's Pilegesh? That would imply that the Pilegesh was Shaul's father. And secondly, Shaul was dead by now. So he couldn't have said anything to Avner at this point because he was already dead. So it obviously means Ishbosheth, who was the son of Shaul. Ishbosheth was the king after Shaul. We all think that David HaMelech took over directly from Shaul. We don't. He didn't. There was Ishbosheth was in between. He was the son of Shaul. He didn't last very long as the king, and he didn't do very much. And he was a bit of a Nebuchadnezzar king, really. And this is one of Rav Bazak's proof that here in this passage, he's given his name in the next pasuk. It's true, but at this point, what Rav Bazak is suggesting is that the Pesukim are indicating to us the low level of Ishbosheth by just giving him the pronoun he without giving him his name. This is in contrast to, for example, the beginning of Parshat Yitro. Okay, you'll all remember the beginning of Parshat Yitro. Yitro comes along, and we're told right at the beginning that Yitro is who? What is his claim to fame?
It was his father-in-law.
Correct.
The father-in-law of Moshe.
Yes. And how many times are we told at the beginning of Yitro, Yitro Choten Moshe, Yitro Choten Moshe? Loads of times. It mentions Yitro by name and the fact that he was the father-in-law of Moshe, because that's his claim to fame, if you like. He was an important person. The Rav Bazak contrasts that with over here with Ishbosheth, where he's not even given his name at all in this pasuk. He's just passed over as a he said, and he's not given his title. It sort of falls apart a bit in the next pasuk because actually he does get a name. He's given his name Ishbosheth in the next pasuk. But you get the idea of where he's coming from with our pasuk. Shaul is dismissed as a bit of a nobody king by saying that he was only 1 year old at the time. Okay, so that's what Rav Bazak suggests. And he says this. I'll just read out what he says. He says that Shaul's age was intentionally omitted by writing the header to Shaul's kingdom in a defective manner. Scripture means to allude already from the very beginning that Shaul failed in his office and we should not relate to him as an ordinary king. We find this technique of intentionally formulating verses in a defective manner in order to send out a negative message elsewhere in Scripture. And then he cites the example of Shaul's son Ishbosheth, which we've just said. Okay, so that's and we actually then go. We have a look at verse 11. We've got another example here. Verse 11. What does your translation say for 11?
Ishbosheth was no longer able to respond to Avner a word because of his fear of him.
And what does it actually say? It doesn't mention his name, and he could not answer Avner, as it says on the screen there, verse 11. So that's another example. Art Scroll is giving us an important translation, because we've got to understand what the Pesukim mean, but it's not an accurate translation. And Rav Bazak's theory is that this is another example that he is not an important person. And just finally in chapter 4, don't know if I've got that one ready or not. Chapter 4, I don't think I did. Oh yes, maybe no, that's Shoftim. Chapter 4. Anyway, we can go to chapter 4. In chapter 4 of Shmuel, where are we? Where are we now? We're chapter 3 here of Shmuel. But if we go to chapter 4, the next chapter, we'll have a look at here. Look at the translation, please. Translation of the first pasuk of chapter 4.
Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, and he despaired, and all Israel was shocked.
Okay, who are we talking about here? Ben Shaul, the son of Shaul. Who is it?
Sorry, I didn't understand, but I felt...
Sorry, who didn't understand?
Sorry, that was me.
Oh, okay. What didn't you understand?
Forget me.
Oh, okay.
Jonathan was the son of Shaul. Jonathan.
Yes, Jonathan was the son of Shaul, but that's not who it refers to here. It refers to Ishbosheth. It's referring to Ishbosheth, who was also the son of Shaul, who was the oldest son of Shaul. But the point being, we don't give his name. He's just called Ben Shaul. And again, what Rav Bazak is saying is this is another example of how a negative impression can be passed on of a person by using defective language. So Rav Bazak's theory is, if we go right back to our pasuk here, is that Shaul we're told this rather weird thing that he was only 1 year old when he became king. Now, Rashi looks at that as a positive thing. He says he was so innocent, he was like a 1 year old person. He didn't have any sin whatsoever. As it were, what the other Mefarshim are saying, and what Rav Bazak is stressing, is actually, it wasn't that he was so sin-free like a 1 year old. He was an idiot like a 1 year old. He was like a 1 year old who'd been king. In other words, his reign was defective, as if he was a baby. It wasn't like he was a proper king, and it's a very negative approach. That's what the theory. Say again?
Naive.
Naive, yes, naive. That's good. That's a good word. Yes, naive. He was naive like a 1 year old. And it's a negative approach, and there are volumes actually written about this one pasuk, because it's such a strange pasuk in Tanakh, and that's why Safaria goes along with Rav Tanchuma HaYerushalmi by saying actually it's defective. because it doesn't really make any sense. But the Mefarshim explain why it's defective.
Another explanation in the Steinsaltz says, beside him being like a 1-year-old, so he had no government experience. He entered government with a clean slate, no governmental experience, and no negative family history.
Okay, that's a positive way of looking at it, but a negative way of looking at it would be he went in without any experience. And again,
that was Targum Yonatan. It's in Targum.
That would fit
and Rashi said this is so.
That would fit. Rashi puts a positive spin on it by saying he was sin-free, innocent, like you've just said, and no family history and no baggage, if you like. That's what we'd say today, isn't it? No baggage. But Michael's explanation is more in fitting with the Radak and the Ralbag, which is that he was naive. And he goes on to say that we can also understand that the words, and 2 years he reigned over Israel, are also an expression of derision, reflecting the weakness of Shaul's kingdom. Whether they refer to their period until David's anointment or not, they do not refer to any particular period. Their main objective is to say that this kingdom did not last for a significant period of time and was not even worthy of the name kingdom. This is particularly an important statement at the beginning of the chapter, which is the account of Shaul's first failing. And that is a quote from Tanchuma. So there we go. So that's I think we've exhausted the ideas on that pasuk. It's clear that there's a machloket between the Chachamim. Rashi wants to put a positive spin on it. Radak wants to put a negative spin on it, and there we are. So let's carry on. The next pasuk. What's the time? We've got a few more minutes yet. So, verse 2, Leon.
Yes, it's in the middle of the sentence. So I'll just read the first half of the sentence. It was in the first year of Saul's reign that Saul chose 3,000 troops from Israel. 2,000 were with Saul at Michmas and at Mount Beit-El, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeat Benjamin. And the rest of the people he sent off, each man to his tent.
Okay, let's stop there. First question I want to ask you, and of course, you know the answer to this because you have read on. But we have something in here which needs to be questioned. And that is, who is Jonathan? You know, because Philip's just told you, and anyway, you read the story, that Jonathan was a son of Shaul, which becomes clear later on in the thing. But at this point, we've no idea who he is. He could be a general, he could be Ramat Kal, who knows what he is? All we know is he's got some troops.
David's boyfriend.
Yes, thank you, Philip. Yes, we'll come to that eventually, but not today. Where's my mute button, Philip? Where's my mute button?
Delete button.
So we need. Why are we being told? Why aren't we being told who Jonathan is here? That's a first question. At the first glance, you look at this pasuk, at first glance, it seems to be completely natural, but that's only because we're familiar with this whole story and we know the characters. If we were reading this with fresh eyes for the first time, we would straight away say, well, hang on a minute, who is Yonatan, who's mentioned here for the first time? Why doesn't it say Yonatan ben Shaul, or the troops were with Yonatan, his son? How are we to know that this is that we're dealing here with Shaul's son? And if you look at the end of chapter 14, which is the next chapter, if you have a look at the end of chapter 14, and it is in verse 49 there, Have a look at that.
And the sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchi-Shua. And the names of his two daughters, the name of the older one was Merab, and the name of the younger one was Michal.
Okay, so we're told over here that Jonathan is the son of Shaul. The question is, why isn't this Pasuk for chapter 14:49? Why is that not over here in chapter 13? So that when we read Jonathan, we know who he is. You'd have thought that that's where it would be, and it should be there. It doesn't make any sense not to be there. So it's sort of reasonable for us to assume that the original location of that pasuk in 14 is where we is at the beginning of our chapter. And in fact, if you look at other kings, I'm not going to go through all of them now, but if you look at the other kings, you can see that is that is the case, that we learn about the family and who they were before we go into their stories. And what Rav Bazak wants to say is that is another example, a subtle hint to us that there is something defective about Shaul's reign here, that we're not told that the Pesukim are all out of order. The Pesukim are defective and they're all out of order according to this theory. Yes, Leon?
It's actually mentioned a little earlier than verse 40, what was it, 47? It's mentioned in the first verse of chapter 14. It happened one day that Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the attendant. So
okay.
It was soon.
Okay, good. It does say that. You're right. It does. That's correct. It doesn't, however, alter the fact that when we're talking about the lineage here in 49, you would expect it, or even according to your verse there, Leon, you would expect in verse 2 here for it to say the Aleph hayu in Yonatan ben Shaul, or in Yonatan beno, his son, and it doesn't. It just leaves us to wonder who he is. And the overall feeling, the overall point of all of this is that the Mefarshim all use these strange syntax, if you like, the strange way the Pesukim are put together, and the fact that there are certain things missing, the XXX years for a start, that there was something fundamentally wrong with Shaul's kingship right from the start. So that's really as far as we can go with that. We of course know that there was something wrong with it because it never continued. Ishbosheth took over from him, but didn't last very long, and the house of Shaul was not like the house of Windsor, which went on and on for 100 and odd years. King David took over, and the house of David, David was from which tribe?
Binyamin?
No, Shaul was from Binyamin. Who was King David? Yehuda, correct. Yeah. Yehuda, and from then on, we're told previously in the Torah even, Lo shevet yasur mi shevet Yehuda, the kingship will always rest with the tribe of Judah, which is why King David from the tribe of Judah, and Mashiach ben David, the kings of Israel in the future, will always be from the tribe of Yehuda, which is why we are called Jews, Yehudim, because we are from the tribe of Judah. So right from the start, we're being hinted at here that the kingdom of Shaul is not so wonderful. Now, let's just move on now for the last few minutes to the story itself. And chapters 13 and 14 are going to describe Shaul's first war. And we see right at the beginning of this chapter, we see an outbreak of a rebellion against the Plishtim. Let's just read what was going on. First of all, let me just show you where we're talking about, because I got these maps ready last night and I'm going to use them because it took me ages to find them, so I might as well show them to you. So verse 2, Shaul had 2,000 men in Michmash. Let me show you where Michmash is. There we go. Can you see there is Ma'alei Michmash. Can you see that there? That is Ma'alei Michmash, or the heights of Michmash. That's a modern day place. The biblical Michmash is very close by. The blob. Let me zoom out and you'll see where it is exactly. There is Ramallah, there is Jerusalem, there is Ma'ale Adumim, and there is Jericho. It's right in what the world calls the West Bank and what we call Yehuda and Shomron, and it is over there close to the modern place of Ma'ale Michmash, and as you can see, it is northeast of Jerusalem. Okay, that is Michmash. Now let's go back to the Pesukim. There were 2,000 troops there, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Givat Binyamin. Givat Binyamin. There's another name for Givat Binyamin in Tanakh. Does anybody know what it is?
Givat.
Who at this stage? Yes,
Givat.
thank you, Leon. Givat Shaul. I was about to say, at this point in history, who is the most famous person from Binyamin? King Shaul. So Givat Binyamin is synonymous with Givat Shaul. And I will show you where that is. It is over there. It is now known as...
No map, Johnny. No map, Johnny.
No map?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. There it is. It's now known as the site of Givat Shaul. Biblical Givat Shaul is Tal al-Ful. And you can see where that is. There is Muhamas, or Michmas. That's where we had the Shaul's troops are over there, where you can see where that says Psagot Winery. That is pretty much where the troops were of Shaul, and Jonathan's troops were here in Givat Shaul, Givat Binyamin. Let me just scroll out and you'll see where that is. That is also northeast of Jerusalem. So it's between Jerusalem and Michmash, and that's where it is. The current place, Pisgat Ze'ev, is a very religious community. It's very close there. In fact, one of my kids, Hudi, went to yeshiva in Pisgat Ze'ev, a yeshiva called Beis Yisrael. And that's where that is. And the other, I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Psagot Winery. Anybody been to Psagot Winery? It's to be recommended. It's a very nice place. I once went to a wedding there. I went to the wedding of Mendy Portnoy. Some of you may know, have heard of the Portnoy brothers. They're musicians. I went to his wedding, and that was at Psagot Winery. Now, as you can see, it is deep into green line territory. This, and when I went to the wedding,
ותשתמשי בזה עוד, זה עוד בסדר.
Philip, can you mute yourself?
תשתמשי בזה, תשתמשי בזה.
There we go. Shut him up. Right. So this Psagot Winery. Where have we gone? I
think you got lost on the way there, didn't you?
I did. It was a horrible experience. You can see it's deep into green line territory. There's Ramallah. I put it into Waze to go to this wedding at Psagot Winery, and it took me through every little Arab village and hotbed of, well, it seemed like to me, hotbed of terrorism. And I'm
Very
driving along,
risky, very risky. You shouldn't do that.
driving along. I didn't do it on purpose. I followed Waze, and it was, I didn't see an Israeli number plate for about 30, 40 minutes. And I was sweating and thinking, I'm going to have a puncture here and I'm going to be stuck in this place. And it was a very, very unpleasant journey. When I got there, it was very nice, and we had a wedding, and I came back via Jerusalem and did not go back the same way. So if you ever go to Psagot Winery, do not follow Waze to the place. It's worth a visit, but not the way I went. Right, so that's where the troops were. And the third map I wanted to show you is over here, because the Pasuk tells us, verse 3.
You want me to read it?
Yes, please, Leon, verse 3.
Before I do, Johnny, it's strange that the Ivrit in the art scroll refers to it as Michmas, with the shin at the end, but with the dot on the left-hand side. But it's translated as Michmash.
Yes, that's interesting. I wonder why. Don't know is the answer. I suppose that Michmash is the English translation. Maybe there's probably a place called Michmash at the moment nearby. Or maybe that's the translation that was given. There we go. Look, Malay Michmash.
Steinsaltz does it with an S for sugar, Michmas.
Right. Okay, so there we go. Rav Steinsaltz being accurate as ever. Good point, Leon. Well spotted.
Jonathan slew the Philistine commissioner in Geva, and the Philistines heard about it. Saul had the shofar blown throughout the land, announcing, "Let the Hebrews hear."
Okay, we're gonna end the shiur now because we're out of time. Just want to show you where Geva is. Geva is over, you could see, let me turn that off. I can't find it, oh, there it is. Geva was where the Plishtim were. You can see on the map there, there's a place called Geva Binyamin now, and this was the archaeological site of Geva where this took place. So you can see Muchamash, that was where Shaul was. Over here was where Jonathan was, and over here was where the Plishtim were. So you can see that the places were all very close to one another in this northeastern area of Jerusalem. This is where this whole thing took place in what is today East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria area. That is where all of this took place, in this sort of this area around here. So that's the place. You can see there's the Ein Prat Nature Reserve close by. That's also worth a visit, by the way. So that's where this was all taking place. And we will see next week exactly what happened next. So we've done today, let's just recap what we've done today. We've looked at this very strange pasuk and some a little bit more of why Jonathan's not given his full title of the son of Shaul. And there's a machloket between Rashi and others. Rashi gives it a positive spin, Radak and others, and Rav Bazak see it as a hint that Shaul's reign was not going to be successful. And then we've seen that there are Mast, and Jonathan has killed the officer of the Philistines, the governor of the Philistines in Geva, and we'll see what happens next week. Any questions or comments before we end?
Yeah.
Philistines seem to be quite far over into northeast of Jerusalem.
Yes, that's a very good point, Michael, because where was the Philistines' stronghold? We've had this earlier on, haven't we? In Sefer Shmuel. Yes, Gat. They had their 5 cities. Who can remember the 5 cities of the Plishtim? See if I don't know if I can remember them all. Gat was one.
Ashdod,
Ashdod, Ashkelon,
Gaza,
Gaza.
Gezer. I'm only reading your map, Johnny. I'm sorry.
Okay, very good.
The
Excellent.
famous map.
And the famous map. And Lachish was another one as well, I think. Lachish was the 5th one. So
Yes.
you're right. If you have a look at that map, let me see if I can get that map up, actually. Just for a moment. Let me see if I can get that.
The 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah, I've got it on my desktop. Let me see if I can share that with you just for a moment before we finish. There it is. Tell me when you can see it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you can see here in our famous map, the Philistine stronghold area, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Lachish, is all on the west. It's on the coast here, and it's on the west. And Michael's made a very good point, because they have encroached eastwards. There's Jerusalem. So where we are in our battles that I've just shown you on those maps is probably where the A and the M of Benjamin on this map is. So they've gone in quite significant ways eastwards. And that exactly is the point, Michael. I'm glad you raised that, because that is the point about the battles of Shaul and David, as we'll come to in the next few chapters and the next book. Their arch enemies were actually the main enemies, were the Plishtim, were the Philistines, who were no longer confined to their strongholds on the western coast, but had actually infiltrated and encroached into very large areas within the land of Israel. So that's a very good point that you make, Michael, and this map demonstrates it very nicely. Any other points, questions?
Just a point.
Yes.
Next time you go to the Shtachim, take me with you as a bodyguard.
Can you change your tire if I get a flat?
Tire, no.
Well, you're no use to me then, are you? I'd rather take somebody who could change the tire.
I can beat up the guy who does your tire. I can beat him up. Yeah.
Just stay on Route 1.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid my sense of direction is poor, very poor. So I tend to follow Waze, which normally does the job very nicely. But on this particular occasion, it put me through a rather unpleasant experience, I can tell you. And it took me quite a while after I got there to settle down. I had the family with me in the car, and of course I never said a word, but I can feel myself getting hotter and sweatier and my pulse rate going up, and I'm looking around for an Israeli number plate, never saw a single one, and I thought, no, this is not for me. And I realized there and then that I better stay in Netanya and not move into one of the caravan
That's
sites.
basically what you accused me of being.
What did Elisheva say, Johnny? How did Elisheva take it?
She's far more sanguine than me, Johnny. She just took it all in her stride.
Thank you
for
spending time with us on your vacation.
When are you coming back, Johnny? When are you coming back?
I'm coming back on Thursday, please God.
Baruch Hashem. We miss you so much.